Hello everyone. The glasses are not me trying to look cool, they're because I've got a problem with my left eye that's going to require surgery, and it's easier if I don't distract you with it. So this is the first of three parts. They all cover a talk I gave in the Isle of Man, so it's a bit like inviting me to your local hall and what the sort of talk I'd give. It lasted a long time because the questions came up and they had to be answered, as it were. I may interrupt occasionally through the talk to put a bit of background in, but before I got to that talk on that evening in the Isle of Man on the 20th of June, I was attacked quite viciously by people on social media, practically being called a Nazi, being called far right, being called this, being called everything, actually, only to find out that the very people leading this were actually things like PR consultants to the wind industry. In fact, there were lots of vested interests. I was treading on their toes, and it was quite vicious, which is why the lady who organised this had to explain at the beginning of the talk the situation. And that day, I'd had a number of interviews actually, and they were all to appear over the following weeks from this. The talk does include specifics to the Isle of Man, but those specifics also apply generally. It's me trying to stop net zero, and the Isle of Man is particularly bad, is all I can say. In fact, it's totally bonkers what they're doing. Mathematically, they've got it wrong, and that's not an opinion. They have it wrong. So, but that in itself, it shows you the opposition I get. A number of the MPs, there's only 24 MPs in the whole of the Isle of Man. It's an independent democracy, totally independent to the UK that way, makes up its own laws, and so only 24 MPs. And at least during my stay, I think the resistance from the MPs went from 1 in 24 to 4 in 24. So we moved the scale a little bit, and the campaign continues to this day to try to get them to see some sense. The talk that morning with on the TV, which recorded on video and on radio, that I did for an hour with the Green Party leader, was so bad. I basically suffered an hour of personal attacks without even the opportunity to fully respond to them. And there was a number of things happening that were sort of people trying to get me, as it were. And that's why there's a whole series of videos about this. Anyway, this is the first part of the talk. So, and it's 3 one-hour sessions, I'm afraid. So this is part one. Sit back and enjoy. I would first like to thank the manager of Manx Legion Hall, who came under pressure, led by a wind industry consultant, a PR consultant, to cancel the talk, to not accept me having a talk in the hall. But that lady resisted this, and she believed in free speech. And for that, I am grateful. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Good evening. I'll just give you a second or two just to get yourself settled. Okay, firstly, thank you so much, everybody, for coming. It's certainly a far bigger attendance than the last time I was in here, which was for a meeting to talk about the proposed wind turbines up at Erie Staine. Of course, that was on the pro side. So it's nice to see there's so much feeling, and I'm hoping that actually we're going to have people with many different viewpoints, both pro and for, in the room tonight, because that's what real discussion needs, is a sharing of different viewpoints. And do you know what happens when you actually talk civilly to each other? Sometimes people go away from that conversation thinking, no, actually, I'm still fairly certain in what I think. That's great. Sometimes people go away and think, do you know what, that's changed my mind. And sometimes there's a little bit of in between. But that's how we develop. That's called critical thought. That's how we as a human race have developed over millennia. And so I'm going to make a call, actually. I'm going to actually talk more about that in a moment, but very, very quickly. I hadn't really prepared much of a talk tonight because I've been running around like a blue asked what's it, trying to get this ready this week. My name's Sue, and I'm representing what we're calling PowerMan. I'll explain that in a moment. Again, a special welcome to people who do not agree with the thesis of Paul's talk tonight. You are especially welcome. Thank you for coming. As you've probably noticed, we do have filming going on. Energy FM are going to be filming the entire event, so just to let you know that, you probably noticed the cameras anyway. When we come to the Q&A, there's going to be quite a few Q&As. It's going to be interspersed throughout the talk. Paul does pauses. And at that point, when you have questions, can I ask you please, before you start talking, wait for the microphone. So somebody will bring the microphone across to you, hold it close to your mouth, and also the boom. So basically Mark here will be bringing the microphone over. So please just wait for that, and that would really help the evening out. There is one thing I have to say, which I wasn't expecting to have to say, and maybe some of you aren't aware, but there's been an awful lot of insults, smears, and what can only be described as defamation against Paul going on over the past couple of days, which I find very strange, because this is an emotive issue, of course, and I don't think there's a person in this room on any side of the discussion who does not care deeply about our planet and about the environment and about our futures. We might have different perspectives on that, but I think we all need to speak with respect. And when you talk about a subject as specific as this and as important as this, it's important that we stick to the subject, to the evidence, to the data, and not resort to attacking the person. And I think this has become a feature of modern life now, and there's certain epithets that are thrown against people who just aren't saying the convenient things. And frankly, I think a lot of people feel that using slurs, such as far right, just because you don't agree with someone, is getting boring. People are starting to see through this now. You know, on every side, it's boring. And it also indicates that you have no argument. You have no argument when you resort to insult. So please, throughout the evening, converse, listen with respect, and speak with respect, and everybody is welcome. Paul is actually one of the most amiable, tolerant, and compassionate people I think I've ever met. Met for the first time in person yesterday, have spent hours on the phone with him over recent weeks. He is not anything like what some people on social media have been describing him as. But then again, I do have to admit defeat, because when having to enter the toxic waste pool that is social media sometimes for discussion, because we were promoting this event, I have been beaten in debate, because I was forgetting in the modern world the ultimate tool in debate is the laughing emoji. You got me, guys. Laughing emoji, that wins every argument. I've got nothing to beat that. Anyway, moving on. Who are PowerMan? Very, very quickly, we're just a group of people who feel that our voices are not heard. We learned that a beautiful part of this island that we call home is about to be ripped up and despoiled with massive wind turbines. The peats and bogs are about to be cut through and destroyed, wildlife gone forever, and we also asked ourselves, for what gain? And we found that whatever objections we raised were dismissed. So we're told we have consultancy, where we're being consulted. And we have been to some of these consultations, one in this very room actually, and where government and MUA, and I'm sure they actually really do believe what they're saying, and I have no problem with that. But at these presentations, it's very clear it's a tell. So they tell you what they're going to do, and then when the public come up with objections, they're swept aside. And if anything is said that is against what is the accepted narrative, you're a denier, you're a tinfoil hat wearer, you're a conspiracy theorist. And that, again, is descending into the depths of ad hominem and insult. I was told the other day, well, people on your side, they're tinfoil hat wearers. And I'm thinking, I saw a video last week of Extinction Rebellion wearing red robes, carrying out quasi-religious ceremonies. So I think on every side of the discussion, we have a few radicals. So let's not go there. So PowerMan, we just came together. We thought, okay, what we're going to do? We realised that our voices weren't being heard, and we tried to come up with alternatives. We looked at geothermal because we wanted to be positive. We want to actually say, okay, we're not just saying we don't want them. We want to give you an alternative. And again, at presentations, they're just dismissed out of hand. And it became very, very clear that there is an agenda just to build these things. And this agenda is being built by targets, is being delivered according to targets that are pressed on us from outside. I mean, 2030, it's a very familiar date. You see it globally. So nobody in Tynwald came up originally with the date 2030. So we need to think about the dates, the targets that are being imposed upon us, and think, is this best for our island? Do we have to do this? Can we do something different? But realising that our voices were weak, we reached out to Paul. Paul, who is a highly experienced scientist his main field is that of hydroclimatology. I'm not going to go into his background. That can come out in questions if you want. But he has very kindly agreed to come over. I phoned him a couple of months ago, and he's come over here at no cost. So all of the presentations and documentation that you get is highly funded. This is not funded. Paul is not being paid, and we have basically put our own hands in our pockets to pay for him to come over here. So I'm very cheekily going to say we've got a couple of buckets at the back there, and if anybody wants to stick a few coppers in there, that would be gratefully received to help cover some of the travel costs. In the very unlikely events that we exceed that, it will go towards future events. Anyway, so that's the boring bit. What is it we're here for? What do we want to do? We want our island and our leaders, well, our politicians, to just stop and think for a moment before pushing us down a road from which we cannot return, certainly not easily. I'm beginning to wonder when environmentalists, or people who think of themselves as environmentalists, are the ones who want to tear down the landscape to put up massive metal structures. When did this happen? When did that become green? I think, I've climbed over gorse to get plastic off the beach. I hate excessive packaging. Yes, I'd like to see fewer cars on the road just because it's quicker to get somewhere. But it's how you get to that that's important. And just thinking of a couple of things that were said in Tynwald the other day, that worried me slightly, because we do seem globally to be faced with alarmist language. They want us to be scared. Almost, alarmist language of emergency and crisis. This is the language of ideology and politics, not science. No scientist has declared a climate emergency. It's a political declaration. One of the things I heard the other day was, what if we reduce pollution, improve energy security, improve biodiversity, improve health and well-being, and it turns out the climate wasn't changing, or that we weren't causing that change? Well then, we've improved our environment, so what if we were wrong? That's a little bit of a subversion of reality. Because the reality is, driving through beautiful bogland, wildlife, peat, forests, to build these structures is not improving biodiversity. Winding down our highly effective energy plant at Pulrose is not improving our economy or our strength. Making ourselves dependent upon an interconnector into the UK is not helping us. Just imagine that they are wrong and we do this. Where are we? If they are right and we make all of these changes, the actual impact on the global atmosphere, on the global situation, is minuscule, and we will still have destroyed our economy. So let's think about this. And one of the things that was also said was about how, and I think this was said slightly defensively, and I actually agree with the MHK that said it, we're a small island, but we are important, and we can make a difference. So saying that our impact is minuscule is not the point. And I agree with her. Yes, We are a small island, and we have independence. We are an independent nation, and we have independent, for the most part, politicians who are not bound by party politics, which is great, guys, because that means you are free to act according to your conscience, not according to what your party whip tells you. So that's why we're imploring you. We actually have a really good opportunity right now to think, consider the evidence, have a real debate where all sides are listened to properly and considered, and then make the decisions that's best for this island. And you know what? If we stop this now, if we actually stop now, take time to make the right decisions, we could actually be a signal to the rest of the world, because many, many people are thinking, is this really worth it? Do we want this, when they see their landscapes blighted and their power bills rising, as we did in Germany, where I lived for 11 years. Many people are looking at this, but it's difficult to speak out when you're constantly shut down. So how about thinking maybe our small and significant island could be the equivalent of the small boy that says, "Oi, the emperor's got no clothes." It's up to you guys. Do it for us. And thanks, Stu, for coming. Cheers. Paul.
Thank you. Everyone hear me? Yes. Now, I make quite a lot of videos. I've got over 100 videos on YouTube to do with climate. And I always rely on certain principles when I'm doing videos. And I always rely on evidence. I give the sources. I provide the proof of what I'm saying. But what is science? I'm going to start off with that. By the way, that's an artist impression of the 5 turbines. What it misses out is the road going through, and foundations for each one of those the size of this room and as deep as this room. That's what you're looking at, 5 of those. You're looking at foundations so big that the huge machines go in. You're looking at tens of thousands of tons of concrete and steel to make these foundations. And the reason is you've got a wind farm where the leverage and the force on that is massive. And you've got to resist that with the base. So, just make that point. The calculation here is if you did it, you're roughly talking about the change you could make if the alarmists were right, and I'll be showing you about that, 1/40th of a millionth of 1 degree. We can't even measure that, but that would be their calculations, not mine. It is a meaningless quest. But I'm now going to do some lessons, and the lessons really almost allow me to explain something that happened on the radio here today. And
Dr. John Clauser is one of the most respected scientists in the world. In 2022, he was awarded the Nobel Prize for Physics.
Yes, I assert that there is no connection whatsoever between CO2 and climate change. That's all a crock of crap, in my opinion.
Right. That is an authority in science worldwide. Yes? He's now just published a paper which has rocked the other side, on climate, by the way. What I've just done, is meaningless as evidence on my side, because that's an appeal to authority. And if you appeal to authority to argue your case, that's not science. It just isn't science. Sorry. So, an appeal to authority is where someone puts forward an argument and invokes some entity's conclusion, that's his conclusion, relying on its authoritative position or status, he's a Nobel Prize winner, to support it, rather than providing their own reasoning or evidence. It doesn't exist in science. It's a golden rule. And if I was being allowed to speak to a school, that is what I'd be teaching them, what science is. And without skepticism, without debate, there isn't science. And I can tell you now, the nearer you get to politics, the less science you get. Right? That's really so true, and you'll see it as it develops. So that's the first principle, appeals to authority. So I'm not relying on him. Yes? And I don't want anyone else to rely on authority. They've got to argue the evidence. The next thing is consensus. You all hear about the 99% and 97%. That 97%, by the way, is 0.3%. You can drive it down. For a start, 40% wouldn't even respond. So that they're not even interested to answer the question. That, down to 60. And as you take it down, I won't go into detail, 0.3%. So what is said about consensus? And this is Michael Crichton. I've got a few quotes here. Historically, the claim of consensus has been the first refuge of scoundrels. It's a way to avoid debate by claiming that the matter's already settled. Whenever you hear the consensus of scientists agrees on something or other, reach for your wallet because you're being had. The work of science has nothing whatsoever to do with consensus. Consensus is the business of politics. And that's what's happened. We politicized our science. Now recently, and I'll give you an example of it. 2 or 3 years ago, all the textbooks agreed on cosmology. They all agreed how the galaxies were formed, how the stars turned into galaxies. Yes? Everyone agreed. There wasn't any dissent. Stephen Hawking knew that. All the famous scientists knew that. But then they put up a telescope. And the telescope measured it way back, over 300,000 years from what they thought was the Big Bang. And there were big galaxies there. And it totally destroyed the whole thinking of cosmology. So the journalists go to the professor in Durham University, who's got the biggest computer in the world for astrophysics, and they said, you must be shattered. All your life's work, you must be shattered. And he said, no, I love it. He said, I've now got such an interesting end to my life. It's fascinating. That's a scientist. That is a scientist. People don't debate me. That wasn't a debate today on radio. They do not debate me. I try to give facts and figures and evidence. That's not debated. People run away from me everywhere. I travel 14 hours on every Saturday almost. I'm on TV, on GB News again on Saturday. I travel to get maybe 3 or 4 minutes of my time on telly because it's so valuable to try to get the message and stop the madness in this world. So there's the second principle I'm going to... and if you try to do this, if you try to appeal to authority for me, I'm going to say you're appealing to authority. Meaningless. That your God's better than my God doesn't get us anywhere. Right? So I'm not going to, and I don't expect anyone else to. I don't expect you to tell me that it's all settled as a consensus, because all that means is you don't even understand what science is. Nothing is settled in science. In medicine, you've had so many cases of an individual doctor saying they've got it wrong on stomach ulcers and suffering for years and doing damage to people before they really discovered what caused stomach ulcers, and he was right. Science is littered with it. Now, I'm a Galileo. If I argued that the Earth spins around the sun, right, and the boss, the acceptance says, the consensus says, if you say that again, I'm going to kill you, I'll change my mind. I will. And he did. Yes? But he was right, wasn't he? They used to give degrees. They used to give in, you're talking about the witches in America, they used to give Harvard degrees in witchcraft. So just that, it's wrong. In the end, the third thing, so you've got appeals to authority, you've got the consensus. The third one is you must observe it to be true. So if you get the cleverest model in the world, you're the smartest guy in the world, and it's not true when you actually observe it, you're wrong, not it. Because all science is trying to find out how the world works. And if the world doesn't work the way you like it, too bad. I came across this recently. I did 2 weeks ago, I was on telly, and they rang me up and said, can we talk about air turbulence, clear air turbulence? Yes? Now, I'm not a pilot, but I do know that clear air turbulence at the moment, it's impossible to know what you're going into. Yes? I understand I could go into the science of it, actually, because of the tropopause and things like this, but I'm not going to. But what mattered, all I did was show a diagram from the Federal Aviation Authority in America, because they have to report, pilots for safety are very strict. They have to report every single turbulence incident. So I showed the graph over time. There was no relationship. But this upset the professor in Reading University, one of the new hot centres of alarmism. So Reading University scientists came on Facebook and did a whole pile of far-right things about me. Yes? Which basically aren't true. I don't belong to any party for a start. I don't do it. I've got views, but I don't belong because my message is climate. And if I start separating off, as it is, climate separated off by politics, then I'll lose half the audience. I don't want to do that, right? So this professor went on, and people came on and said, hold on, you're attacking him, just like today on the radio. You're attacking him. Why don't we argue your science, Because it's really irrefutable, because what I've just given him is observation. The king is observation, yeah? And he wouldn't do it. And dozens of people got blocked as they tried to discuss it, they blocked. And then they went to his website, and he put down, I give talks all over the world, well, over the country, and I talk about climate. I'm a climate scientist. And not only that, the daughter of the Clintons, she's retweeted me. And so is Cher, the singer, has retweeted me. And that was his claim to qualifications. I argued, please let me debate, so he blocked me. He wouldn't debate a single person. So I made a video of it and exposed it. I made a video of it and exposed him for what he is, because he ain't a scientist. And most people, anyone who refuses criticism in science is not a scientist. So I have to start the whole talk tonight with basic principles, right? And I'll be stopping fairly frequently for questions because I don't expect you to remember everything to the end. This is the consensus, by the way. It was 97.1. And this was started by who was it? It was Obama started this. 97%, because he'd seen this, the Cook Report. So let me go through it. They asked in abstracts the summaries of scientific papers. 11,944, 100%. But 7,930 were excluded because they had no opinion. They said, we've got no opinion on this. So this is a poll on politics that say they always put it down as, don't knows. Yes? So the 40% don't know before, or 34% don't know before you begin. 3,876 marked as agreeing we cause some warming. Well, I agree with that, so I'd be in it, right? The next one, 64 marked as stating we cause most of the warming. That's 0.5%. But when they examined the 64 papers, only 41 actually said that, claiming 0.3%. There's your breakdown. But it's meaningless. Meaningless. Now, there's cards out. I don't make any money out of my I'm demonetized on YouTube. So this is my card, and I've got this one, it's not the same because you've got my email address on, so anyone can email me with questions. I answer every single comment on the 100 and odd videos I do. Just to prove I make no money, well, I do make a little bit, and here's how much I make. This is the big oil income is I get £2.73 for 6,100 views on YouTube. And the funny part is that £2.73 comes from people selling solar panels. That seems to appear on the front of my videos, right? But I'm demonetized. So now the video would cost me much more than that because I have to have subscriptions for all the stock footage and all sorts of things. And I have to buy cartoons and things like this. So I lose money. Right. I didn't expect to have to do this. Your entire basis of the entire plan you've got in the Isle of Man is wrong. It is totally wrong. And the news is this. The Isle of Man has to obey the same laws of physics and engineering principles as the rest of the world. Now, I know that may shock some of your members of Parliament, but that is true, right? And what I'm going to expose tonight, they cannot ignore. It's only a matter of time before they have to accept they've cocked it up, right? Only a matter of time. How much have they cocked it up? Well, in the Isle of Man, your maths is basically this. This is the extent of the cock-up. If you're adding 2 and 2 together, I'm assuming most people know the answer to that, but the rest of the world thinks it's 4. And in the Isle of Man, it's 8.44 or 12, between 8.44 and 12.59. That's the amount of error in all the work they're proposing. You are being deceived totally in your roadmap. Totally. And I'm saying that black and white. This is maths, right? Total, simple maths. Sorry, I've got to go back. And there's the explanation. Going back again. And that. There we are. Now, the running, I should have done the running because there's a running to this without sound. Should be me talking. I forgot about that. So, I didn't expect to find this. I really did not expect to find this cock-up. I've done it all my life. I sat on a government quango once. I'll just...
This transition roadmap. It is wrong. It's based on totally incorrect calculations. And I'll be exposing that in this short video. I have done a video prior to this talk tonight that released more details on it. However, let's look at this energy yield here. Now, originally, when I'd made one of the earlier videos for the Isle of Man, I assumed this couldn't relate to the 20 megawatt hours of wind you're putting in soon. But it does. Amazingly, it does. Now, in this particular correspondence with Lizzie, who's in charge of the transition apparently, she claimed it's between 100 and 130 gigawatt hours a year. So now we've got two figures for the top, 150 and 130, and I will deal with both before moving on to the totally false claims about costs. So in summary, at this point, we can say that Lizzie is claiming that you're going to get between 100, 130 maybe a stop, or maybe 150. So in the published one, 150, from just 20 megawatts of wind turbines. That is impossible, and I will explain why. As I will be stopping for questions immediately after this short video, I'm not going to go into too much detail. I'm going to quickly cover it, and then we can discuss it. Well, if the wind was blowing perfectly, the right angle, the right wind, the right amount, all the time, every single minute of the year, you would get 20 megawatts times 24 hours times 365 equals 175.2 gigawatt hours. That is the maximum in the most perfect of worlds. But in your calculations here, which are totally wrong, you're going to get 100 to 150 gigawatt hours a year out of that 175.2. Amazing. And what percentages are those? Well, the minimum one was 100 gigawatt hours a year, and that's 57% you're getting out of that. And the 130 is 74% you're getting out of that, and the 150 is 85%. These are unheard of figures. They beat everything else worldwide. They are total fairy tale nonsense. Simple reason is that when a wind turbine has winds of below 12 miles an hour, it actually has no energy at all. It can't operate. So on those days where you just have nice gentle breezes, you've got no power at all. When the wind's above 55 miles an hour, then the wind turbine has to turn off to save disasters like this. The wind speed is the critical factor, and the turbines are highly sensitive to wind speed. If you halve the wind speed, you drop the amount of power produced eightfold. This graph demonstrates this. Just look at the energy coming out of this when the wind is at 10 meters a second. It's here. In this case, it gives you an output of 3,000 kilowatts. So let's halve the wind speed and see what output we get. Well, halving the wind speed from 10 to 5 meters a second, the output drops from 3,000 to 375. It drops off a cliff. And what is 5 meters a second in miles per hour? It's just over 11 miles an hour. But more importantly, maybe, what sort of energy are we getting at, say, 15 miles an hour? Graph is in meters per second, so 15 miles an hour is 6.7 meters a second. And what you get out of it? It's about 800 kilowatt hours compared to the optimum level of 3,000. So you can see the sensitivity of the turbines to wind. And it is this that means you do not get anything like the load factors that have been assumed here by whoever's advising Manx Utilities. In Scotland, the windiest part of the UK, the British government take the load factor as 28.4%. And you're not going to get that, but you are going to get about 27%. So a reasonable factor for the Isle of Man is 27%. The Isle of Man cannot buck the laws of physics. The Isle of Man cannot just get these load factors. They're impossible. And what's happened here is your advisors have misadvised you, because whoever's advising Manx Utilities on this load factor is simply not just wrong, but incompetent, because this is an impossible level of yield. And because the yield from the wind turbines are completely wrong, by between 200 and 300%, by the way, the entire calculations from that, including costs, etc., are all wrong. It's as simple as that. For some reason I've yet to figure out, Manx Utilities, with their consultants, offer this diagram of average wind speed, which bears little resemblance, has very little meaning when you're determining the load factor on wind, because the average is meaningless, because you can have a distribution of the wind. For example, you can have a lot of low wind speeds and the occasional high wind speed, which changes the average, but in actual fact, that doesn't relate to what you get out of it. So average wind speeds aren't used at all in calculations for wind vanes. In this diagram, above the 55, it's contributing a lot to your average, those storms, those high winds, but it has no effect on energy. It's zero. And below the 12 miles an hour, that's also zero. You don't gain energy. So if you look between the two red lines, the distribution is more towards the low wind speeds. But you've had everything distorted by those high wind speeds in this sector. And because it has to relate to the sensitivity of the wind on the wind vane, you can't use even this true average. Averages have no place in the calculation of wind vane yield. Matters is the frequency at the different wind speeds at the different times of year. And the only way to do this is to really run the model of wind speeds. And to do that, you need a number of years of records, almost on an hourly basis, to run against the model and therefore try to determine the load factor you're getting for that wind vane. But what you cannot do is buck the basic physics here. And the basic physics I've tried to explain in the simplest terms I can. Even a 1% error in the wind measurement results in a 3% error in the output of the turbine. That's the nature of the sensitivity. So if you had a 5% error, that's 15% out on your calculations. It is incredibly sensitive. And also, if you're going to measure wind to get the actual data, it needs to be measured over a number of years. 5 years would be a good period. What you cannot do, as in this case, is take 6 months of the windy weather in a winter and use that. That is unusable data. But there is no way you're going to get 2 to 3 times what wind farms in very windy Scotland can get. Fact. You have to withdraw your entire transition program because it's wrong. It is really puzzling that to date the Isle of Man has had a great energy system, a really sensible, well-planned one. But now you're about to destroy it. Because it's wrong, every single calculation you've done on cost from it is also wrong. So when you say the cost of generation is less than 5p per kilowatt hour, and by the way, just the interest charges on the 40 million quoted for this development is 3.5 pence per kilowatt hour, just the interest charges, a UK government borrowing rate of 4.7%. So this is madness, and it's not taking into account what you've got to do with your gas turbine station. This is more like the true figure of what you're going to get out in gigawatt hours a year, and it does not in any way support the claims you have made for this project. And that would supply about 11% of your total energy needs on current demand. If you're going to increase demand with EVs and heat pumps or anything like that, of course that percentage is going to drop. So this is what you're going to have from 2026. So congratulations, you're now at the point where this has to be backed up by gas power, and you'll waste a lot of gas keeping the power station turning over, ready for the drop in wind. If you can manage to stop this mad project now, you'll actually save huge amounts of money and disturbance and environmental damage, a huge amount. But the rest of the world is already turning. Europe's turning. Holland has started it. Other countries are revolting on it. The green agenda in New Zealand is being dropped. Oil is being explored. What they call the FAR tax, that is a law there, is being repealed. That's for a tax on poor animals. So what's happening is the tide is now turning. And what you're doing is, whilst the tide's turning everywhere else in the world, you're heading down the road of disaster based on a green madness. Now, most of my talk here is not going to be about this. Most of my talk is going to be about the science and the evidence on extreme weather, on the actual CO2 issue, etc. And in many ways, it's more of a shock what's coming than what I've just described. But I decided to change my talk and start off with this. So let's take questions now. I'm happy to answer any questions and discuss this, because what I've just done is say you are wrong, the calculations are wrong, and there's no way out of it for you. I'm going to hold off for a second. I've got a few things to do I've added before questions, just a minute maybe. By the way, this is Scotland. So I took Scottish wind farms. I worked out the double counting that's gone on because people here don't understand this. In Britain and in all the wind farms commercially, we have to pay for every kilowatt they can produce. Now overnight, if the wind's more than you need, you still have to pay. So they're called constraint payments. That top wind farm, 51% of the time is paid not to do it. Right? You don't save this, by the way. This doesn't happen in this case because the 20 is so low, it's below your base. So you won't have that. But if you put the extra up to 48, you would have it. And don't say because it's public, we're not going to pay it.
because what it does is it makes the productivity of the whole thing less. It is, you pay one way or the other, I promise you. I'm happy to answer that question. Look at those. So the average of the top 7, taken at randomly, just this table, it was 28.2, 28.4, 29.3. Look at that one, 34. Good one. Look at the next one, 19.7. And the other thing is, between those 2 years, there was a 20% variation. Now, you've put a SOBAR unit in. So what do the SOBAR people say? They say you preferably should take 5 years. But oh, no. The Isle of Man took winter months and left the rest. It's stupid. Absolutely stupid. Right? You've got no basis to carry and make the brochures on. Politics has taken over the science and the engineering. Right? Don't forget, I've got nothing to gain from this. My time is free. Right, so I wanted to add that. But something else came up, right? Because, I had a help. And this is a 2010 report. And after the show today, I did an hour's show, which is coming out on a podcast a week on Sunday, our political broadcast. Started off as to be 20 minutes, but we ended up as an hour, so he changed it all, and it's going to come out as that. I think a week, can't guarantee it, a week on Sunday. And this was the, I think MHK you call them or something. This was the, I'll call them MPs for me, I can easily remember it. He did a report, they organised a report by engineers in 2010. Now, the physics of wind have not changed. So the actual turbine, it doesn't matter. What I've described about the sensitivities before you get to the turbine. If you make one turbine more efficient than the other, great. But if you take the 100%, you still decline by the same percentages. So it makes no difference. So when people argue, and I've seen people arguing already, I've seen some of your members of parliament making silly arguments against this today, saying, oh, it just changed the time when we pay it back up to 10 years instead. No, it doesn't, because I've only highlighted the first few errors. You have made so many errors on a base. You told me, the way you costed this is, honestly, if I gave it to a 7-year-old to do it, and I explained, I would say, no, love, no, you don't do it that way, quite. That's the level we're doing here. You've got to stop it. Right, so these are 10 locations over the island, some quite near to where you got it. And what do they come up with? They came up with load factors of 19 to 31%, an average of 25. So in 2010, and on the radio today, when I mention this, I'm told, oh, things change in 14 years. Yeah, the physics haven't changed. It's got nothing to do with modern turbines or anything, right? Nothing. So I'm really fed up. I've been watching Facebook things. I mean, thankfully, most people saw through the ridiculous radio broadcast today. But I've seen MHKs already saying, oh, well, it doesn't change anything. What are you going to say about that? Yes, it does. So they've even said today, oh, well, here we have different topography, and you can change things by channeling them, pushing them in there and get the wind through a funnel. The problem with that is when the wind goes at 90 degrees, you get nothing. Yes, you can't buck the physics. In Scotland, we're told they put them on the flats. No. The biggest wind yield factor is in the oceans because there's nothing to stop it, right? Once you're over land, as soon as that wind hits land, it gets a drag factor and reduces its effect. That's why wind turbines are about 10% or so less than on sea turbines. Or people will quoted me today, there was a wind turbine on the sea that got, I think, going on for 60%. It was a floating one. And it was only lasted a month.
Just a correction here. What happened with that wind turbine, it's called High Wind and it's floating. I've done a video on it. It actually gave the world record over 5 years of 54% load factor. That's a world record. But then I'm afraid it collapsed. It basically had such major problems, they had to tow all the turbines away to Norway. And that was done January 2024, and they're still not back in operation. I think they've delivered 3 back, but they're still not operating. So you're looking at a 0 yield factor now. So that 54% is rapidly dropping. Now, the big problem with it is they charge 4 times the amount of gas. They're the most expensive source of wind there is. And about 3 times the cost of onshore. So floating, why would you do it? Why would you vote to have something that costs 300% more than even onshore? So I need to correct what I just said there because it was misleading and not right.
Or two, because he got wrecked. So yeah, if you want to wreck a huge thing, fine. But that is not a measurement you can use, is it? So it's very frustrating for me to hear this rubbish coming into me, knowing the background and not being able to explain. So at least tonight, I get rid of my frustration. And maybe these talks are simply for me to get rid of my frustration.
Okay? So on your own engineering reports, you agree with me, except I managed to give you 27%, right? Your own engineering reports. And the bloke who interviewed me, the ex-NHK who interviewed me, was the man who commissioned this, right? And he had to declare his self-interest because he's got the wind vanes would be near to him. So he did declare his self-interest. That's good. You've got a great system having no parties, yeah? Because I'll come to that, my experience in Britain. So this proved, so what you're telling me is this. Now, this is what you've got to accept. Ireland has these levels. Scotland has these levels. England has these levels. Oh, no, Ireland in the middle. But no, your MHK pointed out to me, you have southwest winds. What the hell do you think we have? No, I mean, honestly, it is unbelievable what I'm experiencing, right? Unbelievable. So, what are we up to? Questions. Now I can take questions at this section. Notice I take questions all the way through because I hit you hard. Come on, it's in your memory there, right? There's got to be a question after that. I put a lot of effort into that. All right.
Hi, Paul.
Hi, what are you?
Out of interest, if we keep increasing the number of wind turbines, oh, so good. If the number of wind turbines is increased over time, what will happen to the costs? Because you say that the gas turbines are run less efficiently as you start to have more inefficiencies in wind turbines. So if you were to say put 100 wind turbines or 150 wind turbines on the Isle of Man, what would happen to the cost of electricity?
Well, first of all, you have no bloody birds left, right? But or bats, and you reduce your insect population for farmers as well. But let me explain something. There are two types of gas turbine. There's what we call open and closed circuit. The closed circuit's more efficient. Who's building the biggest gas power station in Europe now? Who's just finished it, actually? Who? UK. The UK has just built the biggest gas turbine plant there. The trouble is, your gas turbine, which is what you've got, takes the heat from the original burning of the gas, takes the hot air and reuses it. And it gets around about, in Britain, they've just got 65% efficiency. So they get 65% of the energy out. But the trouble is, it can't react fast. And wind goes like this. And you've got to keep the grid in balance, otherwise you'll blow yourselves up, right? So the grid's always in balance. I was on the genomic scheme as a water resource engineer in Canberra in the 1970s. And my job was to supervise any water resources aspect of it. And the building was so big, you'd fit St. Paul's Cathedral inside, no problem at all. 4-story office building when we were building it. That takes 12 gigawatts of energy overnight and shoves the water up into a reservoir at the top, a lake at the top, ready to come down. It can turn on in 3 seconds, 3 or 4 seconds, power's on. What's it there for? Because you only get 9.1 out. It doesn't create energy, it stores it. It's a battery. And we use 25%, so we use 3. Out of the 12, we lose 3 doing the up and down. But when you finish a football match and everyone goes for a blinking drink or something, or Coronation Street break, and they get the spike, they cover it. That's all it's about, is load balancing. What we have done with wind is wreck the entire load balancing model. So now you've got a gas station in Britain, and it's the same principle here. And you've got a gas station, and it's told, no, we don't want you now. We want you in an hour, maybe. Yeah? I've got the same costs. I've got the same staff. At times, I've got to provide the 100%. Yes? And you'd be providing gas all the time anyway, because you're only doing 5.4 megawatts average, and you're having between 0 and 20, right? Now, 20 is below your base load, so you can always use it. But the gas is being told, do this, do that, do that. But it's got the same cost. In any business, if you're having to do it that way, what happens is your costs rise. So the cost per kilowatt hour of gas, if you like, and I'll keep everything in the same unit, and the cost of that rises. How much? Well, in the UK, 25% of the gas prices are down to this. So at the moment, the gas price is £65 per megawatt hour. That's the gas price at the moment in the UK. The wind price we're offering, the solar price is £85 we offer, and we offer £89 for onshore wind, that's what you're getting, right? We offer £102 for offshore wind, and we offer for floating offshore £246. Why would anyone do that? I don't know, right? But that's a very risky business, because that few months of offshore floating got talked about, got towed away to Norway. You know, what are we going to do with it? There are more stupid people around than this lot. I'm going to show you a video in a minute. It's on the top. I'm not sure where it is because my prompts are the next bit. But I'm going to show you one of the most stupid solar farms in the world. Yes? Yeah, it really is. So don't worry, Isle of Man. I'm not blaming the people here, but I'm blaming your policies, right? Your policies are rubbish, and you've got to stop it as people. And I'm here to try and get that. And why the Isle of Man? If the Isle of Man does this, this will be rolled out across the world. I've got professors and everything in America and all over the world, and we can use the Isle of Man as an example because it's a minuscule problem. Because the UK's got a huge problem. The UK is building wind farms, and we're going to be paying 4 to 5 times because the wind power can be 4 or 5 times more than we need overnight. And it's there. We have a windy night, it's going to be very costly. We have paid as much as 100 times the normal price of a kilowatt hour because of this. Right? 100 times. We paid that to keep London in power on the grid once because we had to go to Belgium and buy it in. But now we also have to pay to give it away because when the wind's too much, Belgium doesn't want it, Denmark doesn't want it, no one wants it. So we have to pay to give it away because they don't want it. So they have to close something down in order to take it. And the prices are, well, 1,500 times, right? So the answer to your question, you're going to have to keep those turbines running all the time, even when the wind's full. And you're going to be ready. So there's a big wastage. Not allowed for in the costs, by the way. That's what I mean. I could have gone into the whole thing, done a proper, professional report. And I got nowhere because I've got to simplify this. I've got to simplify it down to you've cocked it up, right? Now, if you want my help, and I'll give it freely, if you want my help on the rest, I'm happy to look at it. But only when you've accepted as a government, when I say you, I'm talking about the government, has accepted the facts behind this. And if you carry on, I think you're criminally negligent. Right? And don't accept people saying, oh, well, that topography. No, Ireland is different to you. Scotland's different to you. England's different to you. And only you have a southwest wind. My God. Right? So, any questions again? Any more questions? Yes? Hold on, can we wait for the mics?
When you talk about costs, are you including tax?
No.
Because gas at the moment, its commodity price is very cheap.
No.
It's the cheapest it's been about 30 years.
Oh, for what?
Gas.
No.
So the unit price of gas, if you look at a chart, if you go back 30 years, and this is not taking into account inflation, it's actually cheaper. The cheapest commodity it's been for 30 years. But obviously, the tax is probably 60-70%.
No, I don't count tax. But let me explain.
But then that adds to your That's your argument.
No. What I'm giving you is the cost at a point of reduction. I'm not going down the road with it because you're not paying anything like that. You're paying 4 or 5, no matter where you are, right? So you're paying £65 a megawatt. In actual fact, it should be about 45. The extra, the 65. The cheapest way you can run your country is gas. That's the cheapest. Yeah. In Britain, we have a mix. Now, through the Ukraine crisis, when the gas price went over 100, really high, the wind saved us money. But before that, we were losing money on the mix, big time. So a calculation's just been done, and it shows, I think it's on this presentation, it shows over the last 5 years, taking the gain of the wind into account, overall, we've paid £18 billion more than we should have paid had we had gas alone. The most expensive electricity in the world is Denmark. It's the biggest number of gas for the population there is in the world. The second most expensive country in the world for power, electricity, is Germany, the same. We're the third. Sorry. That's wrong. UK is the third. The outer, or something you call it, I don't know. UK is the third. I keep mixing that up, so I'm sorry about that. Isle of Man, I don't know where it figures. But so gas is by far the cheapest form of power. And you've got it right already, right? So, and you can't go, but you've got to run high because you can't suddenly change. So you've got to keep it so you can, suddenly turn it off. You're going to just burn gas into the air. They're not green, these policies, right?
But the wind turbine people, their argument is basically that gas isn't getting any cheaper, and that's a complete...
Because they're making it more expensive.
Because it's absolute rubbish.
They make it more expensive, and then they say it's not getting cheaper, right?
It's a tax.
All right, then. The biggest CO2 drop in the world of any Western country, well, anyone in the world, actually, was America in 2016. The CO2 level went down, right? Because they went in for fracking, and that was much cleaner gas. Yes? So it was quite funny that the fracking and all the arguments produced less CO2. But the CO2 doesn't really matter, as you'll find out later. Although it is important as a greenhouse gas. Any other questions?
Right, this is a post-meeting audio note. The gentleman that's about to ask the questions, he asked a few through the meeting, was the equivalent, he was from the Parliament. He's in like the second chamber, like the House of Lords in Britain. And I was asked to try to be very nice to these people. We're trying to get them on side. And so no matter how silly the questions, my aim was to, try and be nice, but I was aware that he was very much extreme and he'd been trained by the Al Gore school, if you like, in America, and I'd been over there for, I think, had lectures and things. So I was aware where he was coming from. I just wanted to make that background clear before we continue on this video.
Yeah, there's a question over here. We've got one mic for now, we've got one mic for the film.
A couple of observations in there as well as questions, really. You've talked about the consensus in science and so on, and you gave an example, but you're working through of that was, I would argue, not scientific. I would argue that there are many, many other studies that are not based on asking a scientist what they think, but on looking at peer-reviewed articles that they've written. And some of those, like the one by Mark Linas, 2021, came up with the figure of 99% of the science-reviewed articles were supportive of current climate science. So that's an observation, but that doesn't so much relate to the Isle of Man.
And answer that straight away, then you carry on with the question.
Okay.
Right? What you've just said is not scientific, because I've told you, you can't claim. And whoever produced that paper is not a scientist, because he doesn't understand science.
No,
it's got nothing to do with it.
Analysis, so
it depends.
But the scientific papers were peer-reviewed.
No, it is not science to carry out polls and give opinions amongst people. It is science to take the evidence on which they base their science. That is not scientific.
Meta-analysis is perfectly legitimate.
No, it isn't. No, it depends. All right, who did they ask? I could go into it. You see, I can spend the whole night on this. You can go into who they asked. I'm a member of Clintel, which is almost 2,000 scientists, totally against it, right? Yes, I'm a friend with William Happer. I'm going to feature his work. Three times scientific advisor to the president. Yeah. I've just shown you an authoritative figure. There's a couple of them, members of Clintel. He is a Nobel Prize winner. What matters is evidence, and you can't use.
It is evidence.
No, it's evidence of an opinion. That's an opinion poll.
No, it's not an opinion.
What
poll.
is it?
It was.
What do they say? What is the question? What is the
analysis?
answer?
Well, they didn't ask the question.
I have to make a few points here. The first point is I started the talk that night stating I don't want to hear about appeals to authority and I don't want to hear about consensus. I explained why, because they're not part of science. So I didn't want to waste time. But this particular gentleman was determined all the way through to catch me out. He represents the government in the Isle of Man, basically, although he's speaking personally, he stays in his role. And he starts to quote a survey, which is ridiculous, which I'll now explain to you. But I didn't want to be discussing this because it just takes up time and it's not to do with the theme of what I'm doing. It's not to do with what I've said, except you shouldn't be discussing it. So here we are. Just look at this survey he's talking about. And he ended there by stating there is no question. Yeah, a survey where you don't ask a question of those people. So we now have a survey where you don't ask a question. And what they did was they took 18,000 odd papers and chose randomly 3,000 out of them. Don't forget the papers are from academia, where the only financing is for the opposite side, for the one side. But never mind. So they take the 3,000 papers, so it's not 18,000. And then they don't ask questions. They look for keywords in it, and then they classify the keywords and produce this pie chart. Now, as it happens, my views as expressed in that talk that night would be included in the 99%, because I do accept that mankind has interfered with the climate, has had some effect on the climate. I think the effect is quite negligible, and I totally reject the anthropogenic global warming scare, but my views are still within the 99%. And ask the question, does mankind
in any way interfere with the climate? The answer is yes. Farming itself does. The advent of farming going back thousands of years does. So it's to what extent? So this simplistic way of distorting things, but just think about it. Trying to assess an opinion from a totally biased population and then actually just using keyword searches without having any nuance around it. So people reading my views, I'd be saying, well, this is what they say. They say there's a big effect, etc. When I don't support it. You can't do it this way for this subject, and it's totally absurd what he's doing. But he just explains it his way, quite well actually, what it is. I'll leave you to judge the validity of this.
They looked at 88,000 articles, peer-reviewed articles on climate science.
That doesn't mean a thing these
They
days.
identified 3,000 of them by using random number generators, so they didn't just pick them. And then they used computers to analyse 15 keywords in the abstract, in particular, which would suggest that they were climate deniers. And then the picture that emerged from that was 99%. In fact, only 8 of the 3,000 articles.
Yeah, but your whole basis is not science. I don't know whether
It's
people...
perfectly legitimate analysis.
No, it isn't.
Yeah.
No, it isn't actually. It's a mathematical model based on
in my
randomness
field,
and
it's
doing
perfectly
this and doing
legitimate.
that. It's a model. And models are opinions. It's an opinion. It is not science. The climate models are opinions.
Yes, I would agree. It's not science,
Good.
but it's not opinion. It's media analysis.
Next
Anyway,
question.
that I gave as an example, which doesn't relate directly to the Isle of Man. You've talked about the need to back up our wind turbines by having gas power. You don't seem to realise we're not going to have gas power making electricity from 2029 or 2030. There won't be gas for backup. The backup will be the interconnector and dispatchable energy.
Since this talk, it has been revealed from a Freedom of Information request that the interconnector costs that they're paying the UK are £176 per megawatt hour, which is many, many times more than the cost of the gas from Pulrose, their gas power station. In fact, incredible amount more. But it seems they also supply the UK with power at times, and when they supply it, it seems as if they're charging a much lower rate. So they export from their gas at a low rate to the UK, and they import certificate bona fide green energy from the UK, costing £176 per megawatt hour. This is incredible. But that was discovered since then. And of course, they won't be able to do away with the gas. That's silly. And even the head of their energy company in Parliament stated that, in his opinion, he could still see gas going by 2050.
Which is still
What do you mean by dispatchable energy?
energy that would allow you to turn on a turbine at very short notice.
And CO2
very
free?
fast. It would be CO2 neutral because it would be grown on island.
Oh, yes, the oil industry at the moment,
Biofuels.
the oil industry using biofuels, like currently in America, even though it's a relatively small industry, pollutes more with really toxic, nasty stuff in the way it's processed than the entire oil industry in America.
Well, that wouldn't be used.
No, I'm
Yes,
sorry.
that wouldn't
No,
be
I'm
used.
sorry. But all right then, I actually don't think, and it's very expensive, by the way. The biodiesel is very expensive. So again, you're shoving your prices. So as regards the interconnector, yeah, you're going to spend what? 75 million or so on a new interconnector.
So you make sense of this. The interconnector they're talking about, and they have an interconnector already. I was told it cost us 60 million to the UK. And very often, because they have their own gas power station, they have been actually exporting energy. But they are planning to put a new interconnector in to import energy when they need it. So the backup is from the UK. And what they're saying is that must be green because they plan it to be green. It's a ridiculous thing. But all these are huge costs for a tiny population. We're talking about a population of 85,000. That's like a small town in the UK. And we're talking, in the end, about hundreds of millions here. So I needed to explain that so you understood the background to where the chap is coming from.
Yes?
Less than that.
Pardon?
Less than that.
Oh, it's going to be cheaper than the last one.
And that's not the price that's being talked about at the moment. But until it's ordered and so on, you can't tell it.
How much? How right then? They're planning an interconnector. Tell me how much is the cost of it then? I don't know. You're the government.
I'm not here as a representative of government.
No, I'm just asking you how much.
Okay.
So you must know, because this whole plan's being rolled out.
No, I've said until it's purchased and there's an order in. You don't know. It's a difficult time to be purchasing.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm not being rude, but you don't know the cost. Fact. Do you know the cost or not?
At this stage, you've got an idea of the cost, but you don't know.
What's the idea then?
I'm not
I'll
going
settle for
to,
an
I'm not
idea.
going to float hypothetical ideas.
That's not hypothetical. You're planning on it.
Okay.
You've got a roadmap with it.
Yeah. I'm not going to quote figures that I've sat in meetings.
You must understand that is not good enough as an answer to the public on costs. That is not.
Let me turn then to your claim that about in Scotland the financing they're paying for non-production of turbines.
Correct.
Here the turbines would be government run, government owned, so you're not paying anybody, there isn't anybody else.
No, I accept that. But you're still paying for it.
I'm glad you accept that.
No. Let me explain. In this case with 20, you're below anything, so there's no constraint payments anyway. But if you make it 48, you'll have constraint. Now those constraints will lose, you won't get that yield anymore. You see, this is where they cheat. This is where they cheat. They won't get the 27% anymore.
You said at the start of the evening you didn't want to be insulting and abusive, but you referred to our government as stupid, and now you're calling them cheating.
So I'm sorry. Right. I'll do it more gently. Instead of 27%, if you have constraints because it's gone up, right, you don't have to pay for it, you just don't get the 27%. So your whole basis of cost then drops to maybe 18%.
I think the figures you've given on energy yields and so on, they're not yet known. The investigations are still going on. The environmental impact assessment is still going on. Some early figures from some early tests, but nothing more than that.
I'm sorry, you planned a roadmap on it that was accepted in your government yesterday, I think. Yes? You planned a roadmap on it. And you planned a roadmap and you're saying it's not settled. Okay, if you want to live in a world where the Isle of Man, I'm not being rude, but if you want to live in a world where the Isle of Man has suddenly got 3 times more than anyone else around in the world...
No, I don't believe that, no.
You don't believe?
Oh.
Well, do you accept my 27%?
I think the figures of 20 to 40% would be about the appropriate range.
No. Where'd you get your 40% from? I talk science and facts.
I took that from a site I was reading today.
No. It'll be offshore.
IPCC.
Was it offshore?
IPCC. No, it wasn't offshore.
No, sorry. You can't get... So you see what I'm getting now, and I'm not being rude, but what I'm getting is a politician telling me, right, that suddenly 40%, 27 to 40% is possible.
20 to 40%.
You're quoting and planning on 85%, by the way, so there's a bit of a problem there, but you're now sticking in the mud. I'm never going to tell you something, and I'm not being rude, honestly, I'm just going to be factual. Right, you've got to accept the cock-up. The cock-up is there, and you've got to accept it as a government. And don't give me all this provocation around it. Don't give me all this gobbledygook around it. You won't get 40%. No one in Europe gets that, except offshore.
I don't misquote me. I didn't say we would get 40%. You asked me would I accept your figure of 20 to 7. I said that's in the range.
So I give you the evidence. I give you what the British government said. I give you what the Irish government can say. I give you what Wales says.
I'm not disputing it.
And you will not get any different. And you know what you're doing is planning something where you don't know the cost of the interconnector. It's probably about 75 million. The last one cost 60.
I think it would be fair to say that we're still carrying out environmental impact assessments. There's work still going on this. This is the site that you're talking about. It's not the fixed agreed site. It's not been agreed by Tyrrell. It's not being financed. It's not had agreement.
Why hasn't someone noticed this huge error of up to 85%?
I'm not sure where the figures you've got are coming from, but until we get final documents, final reports, final environmental impact assessment, final planning application, there's no point.
Yeah, of course, then it'll be too late for these good people to stop all this going ahead. That is the game. No, it is the game. I'm sorry. That is the game. That is the game. The game is, I've dealt with this with governments in the UK. I've dealt with it. All you've done, and I'm sorry, I'm not being rude, all you've done is I can never say it, all you've done is dodge around the subject. The fact is you're not going to get, if you said 30, I may be able to accept it, but not 40, you won't get it, right? And you can't quote me, and check me out afterwards. You've got my email address, this lecture will be about, and I'm willing to put on the film afterwards, I'm willing to put any apology where I've made a mistake and put it right. You don't get 40% on land. You will not get it, full stop, right? You're only getting those values I quoted in Scotland and the islands, including the islands, right? And what you're subject to is a huge money machine in the green energy business. It's a huge money machine, and you are paying for it. Why has Denmark, with more wind than any other country per capita, got the highest electric prices? Why aren't they laughing?
I think when you're saying that so stridently, that there's a huge energy market in the renewable sector, when you're saying that, you're not recognising perhaps that the scale of the market in the fossil fuel industry is many, many times greater. But I'm glad we'll come on to the. I'm glad we'll come on to the issue of the significance of carbon dioxide in the climate later.
I'll be coming on to that. But can I just say something? Someone asked me today in the interview, you'll see it a week on Sunday, and I explained how the green industry making lots. Well, what's the fossil fuel industry done for us? So I thought a bit. And one of my favourite films, it says, what have the Romans done for us? Oh yeah, they took a world where we had dire poverty, famines, the lot, right? And they turned it, one man could do 100 people's job. And this is how we evolved. So that's what they did for us. Just look at the film. You know, what have the Romans done for us? The clip will be on YouTube. And that is how bad this is. The fossil fuel industry has enabled our quality of life. Our cheap energy that we've had has enabled less poverty in the world than ever. But I'll be going into many more subjects. And you will get every opportunity. And I do respect your questions. I honestly do. But I have to argue back and stop any nonsense. I just have to. Any more questions? Yeah. The chap over there. Then you can go.
Thank you, Paul. You're a breath of fresh air. Thank you very much indeed. Just a quick question, Paul. We talked about gas coming to the power plant here on the island. Have you any experience or suggestions about a turbo expander? A turbo expander, apparently. We've got a major gas pipeline coming in at Glenmore, and the west coast comes from a T-junction between Ireland and Scotland. It's under, I can't recall the correct amount of bar pressure, 80 bar pressure, which drives this turbo expander, which generates electricity. Would we have one fitted on the Isle of Man? Have we got one? Have you any experience of one of these?
No, I've got an experience of the principle. What you do, same as reservoirs and dams, with hydro, it's the same as that. You don't waste energy where you've got it, right? And so the sensible application is a very good policy to have energy when it's cheap and repeatable and clean. And by clean, I mean no pollutants. I don't count CO2, by the way, but so it's really sensible to do those things if it makes economic sense. But if you have to subsidise it, all subsidy is taking money from that man over there or woman over there to give it over there. It doesn't make it cheaper, right? So you don't distort the market with subsidies, and if it makes sense, it'll be done because it produces the power. I'm all for that, is the answer to the question. But there's a question over here.
Well, shut up after this.
Yeah.
First and foremost, I'd like to say to that gentleman, congratulations for having the courage to come up and say...
I respect him for being here.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And last question. When people talk about peer reviews, in my experience, I'm all for independent reviews, and I always follow the money and who is actually doing the reviews, because invariably the person that's talking about the benefits of it, it's for the benefits of the people paying for the review. That's... I don't know if you know,
peer reviews in climate. Their peer reviews in climate have lost their ability because the editors... the editor of The Lancet, the medical journal, said 50% of the papers they publish are wrong. 50%, And these days, you can't even get near a peer review with the work. So I'll be showing you some science. I'll be going on to the detailed science. And that will actually amaze you. That's the most shocking part and the most important part to me of the entire evening when I come to the science. But I've made it so anyone can understand it. Yeah? And the funny part is, we'll see, right? So I'll pass on now because we've got to get on with the evening. Yeah, unless there's someone with an urgent. No?
For everyone watching all that, I wish to point out before I end this episode, just a footnote. The Isle of Man government had published figures with costs showing how much cheaper it's going to be based on false information. And a lot of the themes coming from that government person are that we wait to find out the cost when we order. No, we don't. You have to know beforehand. And by the way, as it turns out, since the talk, the cost is going to be way past the 75 million for the interconnector. But how can the government come forward, give the figures, which are totally wrong by 200-300% at least, and then proceed and say, oh, we don't really, we don't know until we order? I'm sorry, it's like children running this project. And that's the point I wanted to make. All those costs were from brochures and everything, nice glossy brochures and things published to the Isle of Man people.